intrigued by this, which is this woman floating, and this guy maybe she's his thought or something. And it becomes a very different kind of mental space than the physical space. And this is more, my friend's sitting somewhere, and she's in a gesture where he's kind of seeing us. And my question is, how interesting is this picture compared to this picture? I find this is more interesting. Because I think the gesture, the kind of looking, this is very well done with the whole fleshy stuff. And the only thing that's curious is, I think that if you had yellow in the background as a kind of luminous ground, if you will, that changed a little bit to this blue. If that was luminous, could she, or rather this light, affect him more? They would have a kind of relationship, a color reflection. If they're so apart, I wonder if that really helps the negotiation of how much she and he are connected. And I think basically this picture suffers from the point of being, number one, we could still say, if we had space here, if we could see their bodies in the landscape, if they would be more in a standing position or a sitting position, it would be a more restive place. And I think, again, this maybe occupies my interest in what isn't there, that rather than what's there. I like very much how you make light, this kind of business with the hand and all that. I'm not totally sold on this, but I think the wind and all that business is romantic and pleasant and interesting. But for some reason, I think, again, it goes back to, could this have been planned so that one is engaged with where they are and how we could meet them? They're too abrupt. And this is a whole different kind of painting, which maybe is fragmentary, maybe it doesn't need to have other things happening right now, maybe reflections. I think the bottom line tends to be, you seem to want to paint them more than you want to paint them somewhere. Yeah. That's the whole trick. Yeah. It's like you want the dessert, but you don't want the soup and the nuts and build up. Yeah. So, do you consider these finished paintings?
Yeah.
What did you mean when you said that you were intrigued by what wasn't there in this one?
Well, wasn't there in terms of, there's something called architectonic approach. Like, if I'm here, I can approach what's in front of me. Mm-hmm. Or I can, I can shift my head and just take this in. So it goes back to, is this like a viewfinder's space, or is it a painting space? And I think that's so difficult. And I think for myself, I sweat that a lot. I sweat it because I want to know, even in a multiple panel situation, I want to know how that location of one picture to the next is going to work. And I find even in teaching figure drawing, that many times the kid goes right for the form. They don't know where that floor is or the space is, and they just want to go for the focus. But the focus really is all of it.
I think we have to train ourselves not to think like a viewfinder.
Yes, the viewfinder is not the view we need. We have to finder something else. And I think the other thing is, Phil Pearlstein, big influence on me when I was much younger. And I would go into a studio in New York, and he would say to the models, just do what you want to do. Just take a pose. He never directed the pose. And then he said, well, maybe you could turn around a little bit and take another pose. And all the time, he's a small guy who's walking around them. And then he would kind of do this, like, And that is what I think is so interesting, because he takes in the space. And I don't know of any painter around who is so dedicated to this space as he is. I was in the studio a few years back, we were in a movie together, and he's got like 5 little sets going on, and he's like in his 80s, and the guy's pumping out the work. He's doing watercolors and he's fascinated by, looking. He has one easel, actually is like a trick easel. He can actually kind of tilt the easel so he can paint their feet. He's so into the location of where they are. And he's also so interested in their relationship that he told me that he pays one model who he's not even painting, but he wants her there in case she's reflecting something on who he's painting. That kind of concern. So I think that's the kind of deal where if you look at art history, what does happen to make us engaged? And engagement means that I'm standing toward him, or I'm standing so I can approach them. And the viewfinder thing is the fault of more our technology rather than art history. Art history shows us this, but we have denied it.
How do you do it, Jerome, when you plan out your paintings in terms of, figure versus the container of the figure? How do you start?
All right, let me just tell a story about, there's a movie theater in Syracuse. It's a very big old movie theater called the Landmark Theater. And it's crummy, and it's like decadently falling apart. And the gold leaf is falling down. The seats are dirty, So I want to use that theater. So I go in the theater and I sit down and I look around, and I know that I want some woman against this wall, like the usherette, but I don't know the rest of it. But the thing I want to do is I start first by going to the place or the space without the figure, and I get to know that location. So I'll draw a lot. And then when I'm ready, I think, oh wait, I could put him here and her there, and then I bring them in. So I am fulfilling my own demand. I want to know the space before I know where the figure will go, because the figure has to be comfortable, visual, eventually in that context. And this picture I'm doing is based on Edward Hopper's New York movie 1939, which has beautiful space to it. I've copied the painting and I've seen how it works. But my Landmark Theater is a much more interesting space than his space. Because Hopper, if you read this Levine book on Hopper, it's like 600 pages about Hopper. It's worth reading. Because Hopper, as a figurative painter, is miserable unless he's into a painting. If he's in between a painting, his wife throws things at him, and she doesn't cook for him, and she kind of avoids him. But once he's happy, he's happy. There's one part in the book that he takes the then 3rd Avenue train, the L train in New York, taken down in the 40s or something. He takes the train and he can't sleep. He's taking the train and he's passing a building at night, maybe 1 in the morning or something. And he looks in, and this woman is in an office space, and the guy's at his desk. And that became that picture of that office with that blue woman who bends over and she's got this tight skirt on or something, and he's looking down. And he goes home, according to Levine's book, and he starts getting his models together. He's so impressed by that. And I think that is part of the wonder of what makes us visually ambitious and looking forward to something. He would just click onto some experience. I have to do it. I must do this. And he did it. The New York woman, the usherette, is his wife, but he spends a lot of time in theaters drawing the interior, making little sketches. And I think that says a lot about how he wants to have us with him. So going back to this, the daylight, the light effects. I don't believe the light affects her the way it affects him. Although I do like the exaggeration of the hands of the guy, and I think maybe the pants look good together with her pants or something. But I really want to join them, but I have to cut my legs off to join them. Or, to believe that the world doesn't have ground. And I refuse to. I don't believe that. I do believe there's ground. As I said, I think that painting is more of a kind of emblematic or head trip going on. It's not a physical place. It's a more mental thing. And the lower one, of course, is all about wind and weather and clothing and all that. So we have to know the location of the feet. In the top one, it's a curious thing, but it's more of an emblem picture of her and him and his gesture. And I would like to see more of those people together, whatever they do. It's interesting. And I think what's interesting about both of these pictures is he has two avenues. This one emblematic avenue, which deals with not the physical spaces, but this one does deal with physical space. There's something enjoyable about drawing towards a painting. I tell my students a lot of times, take a big piece of paper, start putting the figure in the middle. Don't think of anything else but put them in there and start drawing, and then start feeling you can add paper here or paper there. And so the drawing possibly becomes a smaller version of the painting to come, but the axis of where the size of the paper is, if you double it, becomes the painting size. So you're already painting the picture through a drawing process. You're getting ready for it. And I really believe if you know what you're doing in the figure-ground relationship, in the lighting and all that, if you know what you want, then you have more kind of enthusiasm to meet the painting, because you're stepping up to the next stage of it. And I think that is so beautiful, that you have the studies toward the painting, and not that you throw yourself in a painting. Because if you throw yourself in a painting, you can be lost. The whole thing is you first find, so you're found with the painting. You find everything at once. Right? That's what I think. In the Getty, there's some German stuff in one of the rooms of, with Cranach and Terbruggen. Terbruggen is the guy with the very exaggerated arms and depositions used. He's very Terbruggen. He's into a kind of German physical body. It's like, the Germans treat the body almost like sausage. It's like meat. The Italians will treat the body like it's ivory, touchable. So, I think this is kind of interesting that you see your body as a kind of physical, rough, gestural place, which I like very much, but it has an expressionist edge to it. With that hand, that left hand, is quite beautiful. And that thumb and all that stuff. So, I think I know why you paint the nude bodies. And I think you should have people pose in landscapes nude. Take the clothes off. You're too involved with, skin and sausage.
Draw the landscape first.
Yeah, right. In New York, we have a museum, a fairly new museum, called the Neue Galerie. It's past the Met, it's on 90-something street. And it's a beautiful building. And they have two very heavy, loadedly rich collectors who bought the building and put only, Austrian art in it. There's like a show now of Hodler, who's actually Swiss. But there was a show of the early psychological paintings of Kokoschka, and they are knockouts. And there's one picture of a young psychiatrist and his wife, and the whole picture is so magical. It's kind of like that space too. It's not a physical thing. It's more like I remember that. It's like a thought. It's not a place. It's a thought of them. And the guys, their hands are kind of doing something like this. His hands and her hands. And for some reason, the Austrians with Klimt and Sheila, Kokoschka, the hands were talking, and they were not talking. And it's just one of these pictures that I felt on my knees. It was just so beautiful. And it's that kind of space. And I think you should look at I think early Kokoschka is wonderful. I think he folds down quite a bit. But check out the early coupling of Kokoschka's portraits. They're terrific, especially that one. He really does portraits in a way that he just like attacks the person. It's like he does the picture maybe sometimes very quickly, and they're brutal, but they have such power of remembering. And also in the Glitter and Doom show that you saw at the Met, it was great. There's a great part of it with Otto Dix. And Otto Dix did this Jewish man, his non-Jewish wife, and the 2 kids. It's a very famous painting. And in the book, and as a kid I never read art books. Now as an older person I read the art book. You know, I want to find more out. And the boy who's in that painting, which is a pretty interesting picture, he said, "I'll never forget, Dix came to me. He didn't have any drawing material. He just would look at me like I was some kind of animal in a zoo. He just would look at me and stare at me." And this went on for forever for him. And Dix nodded his head and left. And he comes back with a portrait of the boy. I mean, this is pretty how the guy absorbed, like a vacuum cleaner, information. And I mean, it's very tough, very tough. And I think, you know, when you find situations like that, one could paint that way. One could paint by looking and then remembering. George Gross did that too a lot. He didn't just look at the model, he remembered them, thought about them, and went back, got more information. But it's like back and forth with memory, not just with observation. Bouguereau, who's Salvador Dali's favorite painter, his advice was, and this is weird, but it makes sense in a way if you want to get a migraine headache. His advice was, you look at somebody, and then you close your eyes and you look again, and then you paint. Because it's like you almost like open the lens of a camera. You put her in, and then you project that on the canvas. But if you keep doing that, it's like, it's like they call you blinking. I don't know. But whatever tricks use to get what you want, I guess. It doesn't matter. But I think you have 2 viable possibilities now. The self-portrait with the thought space and the space of social space that you can go and touch and talk to these people. But they're not social yet. That's what I'm talking about.